responsibility is the key reason why people don't have wealth. You have to be responsible for your actions, your reactions. You have to be responsible for your next thing that you do, and even for your mindset. And if we don't take responsibility, we can't have prosperity because one doesn't exist without the other.
How do you think that human free will, this is both a tactical question and a spiritual question. How do you think that free will plays or interfaces with free market?
Nice. I mean, here's why we don't have free market in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. Because the premise is people can't be trusted. And we have to use regulation and force to get them to do the right thing. Yep. But now we have to assume that the person in regulation and force is doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And what it says is, you don't know what's best for yourself. I know what's better for you. Even if that were true, part of our evolution as a species is to learn. And if we push it down to lowest common denominator, where we have a false sense of security and safety at the expense of the people who produce the most and take the most responsibility, we actually stunt the growth of humanity. And so free will is where our purpose comes from. And we will make mistakes in a free market. And those mistakes are part of the ingredients of lessons that you can't always learn from a book or a podcast, that we go through it and we go, okay. Now, some people learn the wrong lessons, like I've had situations where I'm like, man, I want to keep trusting, but this is hard. But what I realize is like, I'm just not trusting myself is why I'm projecting that. Because anything I say about someone else is something that I have to look into my own self and say, what is unresolved in me?
Yes. And what's interesting is what I get the most triggered about in my life, and especially when I look back in total honesty, man, of my journey with money, is connected to being raised on welfare. I used to stand in that special line in middle school where the kids knew that the kids in that line were poor. And that was like a real thing. And my dad was gone and my mom was stressed out. And like, we didn't starve. I'm very fortunate, actually. I'm a white guy from East County, San Diego. Like, there are people that have 20x more depth in hardship than me that I'll even understand.
As kids, we don't really know the difference.
We don't know the difference, though. My nervous system was just so like a rose open to its environment that I really started to be angry that we were poor and angry that there wasn't enough. And just like anger fueled me for so long. And it wasn't until I just got beat down that I shared earlier, where I just opened my mind to people that had money that I actually liked the way they were being. Because there's a lot of people that have money and they're not being great people.
Yeah, if we vilify others, we don't have to take responsibility ourselves.
Right. But so this is a big piece. And this is actually the tactical in relationship building in your formula. So the mental side, we've covered quite a bit. There's much more in the course. Yep. But the relational skill set to be like, right now, you and I are cultivating a friendship, right? It's a natural thing. It's not forced. I don't have a hardcore expectation of how you show up or what you give me. Same. That's how real relationships work when you're dating someone, when you're in a friendship with anyone. That's how it's supposed to be. But if I bring to the table right now my projections of what I think a wealthy person should be or what you are, or like damnation of your character and soul, it cuts off, to even our earlier point, when I look at you reductionized, it kills the space for capacity of creation.
Yeah, when we label someone, we look to validate that label.
Right. And then I can be right and justified, and then we don't have a friendship. Right. This is lose-lose.
Right, lose-lose instead of win-win. And, look, we're imperfect beings trying to do our best. I mean, I've been a victim before and didn't realize. I'm like, oh, I'm acting like a victim. That's why I'm in pain. That's hard to admit. And I'm like, okay, it's time to do some work. And that work is, we got to do the inner work.
So when you started to do that work, and I'm curious what that work was, how did that impact your relational aspect of your quotient?
So I wrote this book, Disrupting Sacred Cows, after some work I did, which was the follow-up, because someone's like, what didn't you write in Killing Sacred Cows that is so instrumental? I'm like, I didn't write where scarcity comes from. I knew at a surface level, it might come from something we hear from a family member or in society, or, experiences that happen. But I did this somatic, I did MDMA sessions in the somatic therapy method. So you have an eye mask, you take MDMA, and you have a therapist that has you take a mind's eye look through your body. And then the body actually does the work. Your mind just sits back. And it's weird because last session I came up with, once I healed something, it was worry that was stuck in my hip. She's like, well, what's left now that the worry's gone? I'm like, intrepid. I didn't even know the word intrepid. I was like, where'd that come from? I was like, intrepid? She's like, oh, this is what intrepid means. I'm like, well, that's great. But when I did the first session, I couldn't move my shoulder. And someone's like, it's probably emotional. I'm like, no, I was lifting weights and then playing football with my son. And then it couldn't. And I was like, so I went and got x-rayed, got ultrasound. I did stem cells, prolozone, dry needling, everything I could think of.
Yeah.
One MDMA therapy session, I could move it fully because it was just an emotion that was stuck in there. And so I did, from 2018 till today, I think I've done 10 sessions. The first 8 sessions were on childhood and the last 2 were on generational. And just these trapped emotions and belief systems that were subconsciously, paradoxically hidden from me. Getting hit by a car when I was 3, watching my, in a cop car going to a hospital 30 miles away, watching the reaction of my mom, having my dad show up in his coal mining outfit with coal dust on his face and my grandparents show up worried. I'm like, ooh, when I'm not perfect, I hurt my family. At 5, at my favorite place in the world, behind my grandparents' house, catching salamanders in the creek, 2 older boys come and say, hey, you want to join our club? That sounds amazing. And then turn out that's not the club you want to join because they molest me. Right? So like now everything that I love isn't safe. And like, so I go back and do this work and heal that. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, here's where the scarcity came from. And it was stuck in my body. In physical pain that was actually emotional pain that my brain was smart enough to distract me by putting it into physicality instead of emotion. And then once the work happened, I released it and it showed me my false belief systems. I was like, oh, those aren't serving me. Those are false belief systems I developed before my prefrontal cortex was fully formed and then hidden from me. So anything reminded me of something, I would go into preservation and protection, right? So once I understood that, then I went into generational things that weren't even mine. And I was like, oh, and then I did the body code work with one of my clients that created it. And he took me through and it was like 7 generations back on my great grandma. And I was like, oh, okay. So it's like all these things. Once I saw that, I was like, well, I'll write a sequel about where does scarcity come from? How does it hold us back? And how do you actually heal it? And I'm not the expert in the healing modalities. I just put 3 pages of resources at the end because whether it's EMDR or whether there's so many different modalities out there. But if we don't do the work, it just lingers and stays with us and kind of creates that invisible ceiling or maybe visible that we're just confused how to get through.
Man, no matter. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's so good for people to hear because there's a lot there. The ability for us to heal comes from awareness and resourcefulness, right? So once you're aware of the wound, then you do the character building that's required to gather the resources to heal it. So I'm not saying that everyone needs to go do MDMA or needs to sit in a plant medicine ceremony, but this is actually part of your quotient of relationship building. Because if I don't have a loving relationship with Josh, how in the hell am I ever going to build a loving relationship with my children, with Garrett, with my audience, with my team? It's just not possible is what I'm saying.
And we didn't we didn't get an instruction manual on how to love ourselves, or I didn't.
No, and neither did our generation.
And it was more kind of like the opposite.
Our parents definitely did not. We're getting somewhat.
We get more now. And then I didn't get an instruction manual with money when I was born either. So I'm just going through, fumbling through those 2 areas and decided to share it.
The part that's so both liberating and also terrifying is when you went into the molestation, there was a gift there. And I want to be very respectful of that because I'm not pacifying, I'm not belittling experiences like that. I've done such deep journeys where I've asked God so many times, God, if anything has happened, I promise you I can feel it. Like if I've ever had sexual trauma, please share it with me. Like I'm ready to receive, and I've never gotten a clear yes. No memory has popped up yet. For many people, sometimes JV Crum, he's a big podcaster.
I know JV. Yeah, he's been on his podcast.
At like 50 something years old, he had a memory pop through of sexual trauma. And it changed his entire outlook on his health and his business and his life. Like he's a brand new person. What I'm saying is the nervous system, Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. The nervous system is so wise and so intelligent, more than any practicality of finance that we may go over today. The nervous system is so wise that it knows the connection between the unconscious mind and the nervous system, which is essentially the same thing. It knows exactly the perfect time to bring forth what is most wounding so that it can be healed. I just revel in the power of the nervous system and the unconscious. It's so profound.
Well, I had this dream one night, which was like summer of 2018. It was like a thin person up on stage. I felt like I was in New York and there was lights to the side of them and they're performing and I was like directing, it felt like. Then all of a sudden I was the performer. Then all of a sudden I was the audience. Then I woke up and I turned to my wife. I'm like, I'm going to write a theatrical keynote. I'm going to write a one-man show. She's like, that's cool. What's that? I'm like, well, my buddy Bo Eason has a pretty cool one and this is what his was like, but like I'm called to do this. So I have this formula. If it speaks to my soul, I immediately go, who's my co-creator? Because that makes it real. So I call Bo. He's like, well, here's my acting coach. Here's my movement coach. I might get their information. Then I called Michael Port, who had done some speaking coaching. I'm like, hey, have you ever directed a one-man show? He's like, oh, dude, that's my jam. I was like, great. What does it look like? So he gets a screenwriter and, I start working on it. And I hire this guy, Larry Moss, who has coached DiCaprio. And, I'm probably the worst actor he's ever coached because I sucked the first day trying to act out this one-man show that we created. And so I'm working with him and he's like, all right, first suggestion is you gotta do some work on your childhood. I could see it in your neurology.
Wow.
And when he would coach me, he'd yell at me to trigger my neurology. My sister would be sitting there watching, crying. But it was like, he's a kind man. He just knows what to do. And it was like, that was holding me back from being expressed. So how cool that I get this gift and a dream that then starts helping me heal. And by the way, the play that I wrote is my instruction manual for life. It's like, it's all the lines that, there's a whole segment just on sacrifice. Like where I actually do like a money rap or like a rap where I'm like, sacrifice is the vice that traps us in losing games. Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. Say yes when what we mean is no. Worried about others' feelings more than our own. We sacrifice life. Sacrificing who we are in the name of safety and security, time for money, all at the expense of today. So anyway, that's just like a little segment of it. But it's like, how cool is that it leads me back to doing all this personal work? I didn't know that's what it was going to do. But it's like, it's been a gift.
Such a gift. But the intensity of the healing can be a stopping point for many because they haven't cultivated the courage. And that's not out of shame that I say that. Everyone's on their own path and everyone has their own timing. And it's all good. Everybody's got their own timeline for healing. Yet, many people that have wealth, they do so much work because of their wealth. And I'm always like present to who's with us, right? I'm always present to who's sitting or hearing this. If someone is creating the excuse or the validation that you have to be wealthy first to do your healing, what do you say to them?
Well, like, there's so many great free resources right now. I always look at it, when you have more time than money, then you have to just take advantage of the free resources and do the work by yourself or with someone that is a friend that you don't necessarily have to pay for. If you have more money than time, it's easy just to go right to the top people and the source I found.
Sure.
Like I've just reached out to authors because as an author, I know if people compliment my book, I'm pretty susceptible to flattery with the whole thing. And I'll do things, to support them. But yeah, so you just have to look, there's plenty of opportunity. Like, and that wasn't true 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But thanks to the internet and thanks to, technology improvements, like you could do the work. Now, I'm glad that I was on MDMA in that third session when it was 3 hours of blank tunnel stare, like doing nothing. And my therapist just sat with me because I was coming out to the other side to see what happened. I got to feel what it was like to lose innocence, lie to my mom for the first time, get away to a certain degree, wreck my bike, have a bruised rib and a bloodied mouth from falling off the bike, trying to get away. Like, and then I could look at where that innocence lost came up in other things, and I was like, oh, that's why that was so painful, even though it was a completely different context. And by doing that work, it's not something I love to talk about, but I think it's important to talk about. Mm-hmm. And thank goodness for the healing modalities, because if I didn't, it's kind of like the show The Town. You ever watch that? Ben Affleck directed it. It's pretty awesome.
I've seen some really good Affleck film, not that one.
So that one's great because there's a moment where he's talking to this girl that he's dating, and she's like, just another sunny day, but says it really like in a depressed way. He's like, what do you mean? She's like, my brother died on a day like this. So a sunny day reminds her of the death of her brother and puts her in a somber, sad mood. And that's what happens with our unresolved issues, is when we bump up against those things that maybe should be like, hey, you just had success, but maybe you had success right before major trauma. And so success reminds you of the trauma, and you're pushing success away because you have this subconscious belief that's hard to see.
If you love that video, you'll love the one on the screen right now. Click the one on the screen and enjoy.